Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever we find ourselves. Um, as an interest in the parshas that we're going through, there's a brief mention of the manna, the mon, which actually is more accurately said as mon, because the Jews actually, when they saw it, said mon, and they called it the mon. Now there's different interpretations why they called it that, but that's what that's how it got its name. So what is the mon? What is the manna? The manna, the mon was a miraculous edible food that fell each day from heaven during the entire period when the Jews were in the wilderness, between the Exodus and the actual conquest of Israel. And a pride provided them with food, sustenance throughout their travels in the desert. That's not to say that they didn't have food and cattle with them, but it accompanied them. Now, a month after the going out of Egypt, the food which they had prepared and took with them ran out. And on a Sunday, which was the 15th month of the year, they turned to Moses and Aaron and asked him, "What can we do about food?" So there's a whole discussion about the way and style that they asked, but that night a flock of poultry miraculously arrived, and the next morning a special edible substance fell from the sky, which received the name manna. Now, there is an opinion in the Torah which says that in actual fact that they had some food left over, um, and the manna only began to fall 3 days later. Which, interestingly, if that opinion is accepted, it turns out that the mon started, and the mon was a miraculous food, on the same day as the day of Lag BaOmer, which will eventually become Lag BaOmer, which was a day of miracles, and the miracles which are listed in relationship to the festivities of Lag BaOmer, that the holy Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yochai passed away on that day, and was put as a day of celebration. So there are other differences of opinion, which we alluded to in the relationship to how it got that name. Some some people say that the idea of mon means actually a measure of food, and and therefore when a person gets an allotment of food, sometimes that's referred to as a mon, and other commentators say that it got its name because when the first time the Jews saw it, they actually called it mon in Egypt, and in Egyptian that means what, like what is this? Right? So because they didn't understand what it was, it actually got that name. Now, in the text itself of the Torah, the mon is the mon was uh, described as something as the size of a coriander seed, not too big, the color of a white um, a white crystal substance, which is called Behaloscho, and has commentary around it. And in order for that manna to remain clean, the north wind would blow, sweeping the ground, and then the rain would wash it, and the ground would then be covered with a layer of dew, and the manna fell upon that, after which the manna was covered with another layer of dew, and as if it was packaged in a box. Now, we're going to come back to some of these descriptions when we get to a discussion of the mystical understandings of what was mon, because we always have to remind ourselves that that the mon really was sustenance from heaven. It was food from heaven. And this wasn't something that you had to apply for. It actually came to you, which we'll discuss. But what did the Mon achieve? The Mon achieved a lesson in faith, a lesson which relates to a person's understanding of where his parnasa, his sustenance really comes from. So every day, enough mon would fall for each person to have a certain shiur, a certain size amount of this base crystal product food, to have an omer and which of a size which was um, 43 ounces, which is the standard size which we call an omer at the moment. And we've heard about this name omer before, because after all, this is size. And this was enough to satiate a person for one day. Now, as part of the requirements of the mon, or as part of its actually its own characteristics, Moses commanded the people that they're not allowed to save the month from one day to the next. Any leftovers had to be discarded outside your house, outside your tent. Otherwise, if you didn't, they would anyway naturally become wormy and inedible. And the purpose behind this was to teach a great lesson in faith, not to have the idea that you couldn't keep anything for yourself, not to have any reserves. Therefore, the Jewish nation had to have a full faith in God that He would provide their needs each day. And therefore, when it came to the discussion of Shabbat, of Shabbos, on the first Friday after Manna started falling, the Jewish people went out and discovered that they got a double portion for each person. And Moses explained at that point that this was for their Shabbos, for their day of rest, in which no manna would fall. To commemorate this double portion on Shabbos, we make the Hametzi blessing on 2 challahs, on 2 loaves of bread. This also serves as a reminder that just as the manna came from heaven, so too our parnasa, our livelihood, is ultimately dependent upon God. They say a story of a person who was a job seeker, and he was applying for work, and he was waiting for some sort of job to turn up, but it wasn't coming. So he prays to Hashem, and he asks for some sort of parnasa. So he hears a heavenly voice, but for sure we'll give you parnasa, but fill in the application form first. So ultimately, we have to do some work for our parnasa. Now, this is an interesting point, because depending on who you were, or depending on your status, your personal spiritual status, you were delivered parnasa in three types of ways. The manna would fall in such a way that a person who was absolutely righteous would find it at the doorstep of his tent. An average person had to go out to the camp to gather what fell there. And a person who was less than that of that spiritual state, he had to go far out of the camp to find his portion. And additionally, for the righteous, it fell in a way that it was ready to eat, similar to completed bread. For an average person, it fell as an unbaked cake and assortment of powder, requiring some sort of minimal preparation. But for the not as holy, or the wickedem came as in a totally unprocessed form, and constantly they had to grind it in a mill and then bake it and make it together. And if a person didn't collect it by the right time, it would melt in the sun. That is, if it wasn't collected by midday, the mid morning, the technically what we call the fourth hour, after 6 a.m. plus 4. So in mid morning, if a person didn't collect their manna, it would melt in the heat of the sun. And then the Medrash tells us, interestingly, that the melting manna would cause streams that provided drinking water for many of the animals in the wilderness. And if a member of a nearby nation or the traveling camel trains would eat from these animals that had drunk from the manna that came in a stream, he would be able to get somewhat of a taste of the manna. And the manna was given like a honey taste, but because it was this miraculous food, it was said that by person wishing, any person could taste whatever taste he desired in the food of the manna, whether it might be a meat substance or a fruit substance or a grain substance. A person could intend it. Now, because it was a heavenly food, the manna contained nutritious matter only, and what was therefore it was fully absorbed by the body. So after consuming it, the Israelites didn't need to expel any waste products. It was an amazing holy food, to the extent also that it came in a delivered basis from Hashem, and it came with bonuses like precious gems and pearls. Additionally, our sages talk about that it gave off a beautiful smell, and it served as a basis of some perfume for the women. So we are understanding that the mon itself was a spiritual, or something which was a a something which had mysterious spiritual capabilities, and 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 at the same time, uh,
Hello. No one is available to take your call. Please leave a message after the tone.
uh, so well, so um, so uh, this food uh, with his with his spiritual qualities was a interface of something spiritual coming down in the physical realm, and and uh, empowering and supporting the faith of the Jewish people, um, uh, and in giving them the faith for that they would have for the next for embed faith in themselves for their period of the time. And this was training the Jewish nation for for the faith which was necessary in their future. So, in summary, the manna of food um, um, was a bread from heaven, a physical object that had heaven-like properties, and and therefore the manna had a divine quality that could imbue into the eater of it some holy aspects. And because it was holy food, it it was somewhat like the idea of giving us an indication what the highest levels of holiness can prescribe. That is to say, that it produces no waste. When you consume it, it produces no waste. So it's totally absorbed by the body. Furthermore, it was interestingly given to everybody, but depending on their status, a person had to do different sorts of work, but it was made available to all without differentiation. And the holiness, by virtue of consuming it, refined the eater in some sort of way. So in that way, it resembles something like the holy mitzvahs, and in particular, Shabbos, to the extent that even a wicked, we say on Shabbos, the expression is that the holiness of Shabbos doesn't allow a person to say a lie, because the holiness of the Shabbos influences, and so also the manner influence the person and refine him. And because it is sustenance, so it was called lechem min hashamayim, bread from heaven. Now we know that the blessing on the challahs, a blessing on bread, which we make, is what we say the blessing, hametzi lechem min haaretz, before we eat it at the Kiddush time, when we eat the challah, we'll say the blessing. We bless Hashem, and we use the expression. We express this lechem min haaretz, meaning the one who brings sustenance or bread from the earth. So the Jews, when they made, or an opinion of the Torah is that when the Jews made the blessing on the mon, they used to say that expression, but the bread from heaven. So this is the idea that it is a sustenance, it is food, but it's a sustenance which, by virtue of its spiritual nature, affected the physical and gave the person sustenance, a spiritual sustenance, but a physical substance. And to the righteous, it was given ready to eat. And depending on your spiritual status, is how much effort you had to put into it for it to become absorbed in you. A person can see some, parallels to that in thought, and I want to delve in that with a little, soon, and a little bit longer.
Okay.
So we're going to learn a lesson about this mystical food, further on. But I've done some investigation and looked through some other studies. I've been interested to find different understandings in the mon, how it's explained in a mystical sense. So, because food is food is something which gives us a good feeling, a certain delight. We understand, and the mon gave the Jews the highest level of delight. We talk about that this level of delight comes from the highest levels of spiritual delight, the idea of being in a contemplative highest level of connection with God, which is like the idea of basking in the sun rays of Hashem. And this gives us an idea of, in relationship to a connection between the mon and the physical world, which then embodies the ideas of a transition from spiritual to physical. So we can understand the Mon as representing a level of transition and a level of sustenance that transcends physical and natural limitations. And therefore, it serves as perhaps as a template in understanding the transition between the spirit to the physical. So that idea that we said that it has this universal taste, this idea that whatever taste you wanted, whatever was your pleasure, shows that it possesses a miraculous quality that the eater could experience any flavor they desired. And this is like the idea of the essence of color, that if you look at the color white, you can break it down and you can see all the different colors in there. Hence, the idea that since the Mon came from a source of spirituality, which is of the essence of all delight, and in the mystical context, we talk about the level of Atik, which is a deeper level within the level of Keter, which is beyond the 10 spheres. So it's described, so we can talk about that the reason why the food could contain any taste is because in its essence, it was embedded with the highest level of uh, of joining of different specifics into one essence, and that's the idea of like when we talk about some food and you get some sort of liquid and you make this essence taste. The liquid that you drink, which is called the essence, might be bitter, but when it's put into food and when it actually uh, transitions into, let's say, some sort of physical cooking object, right? It gives a beautiful sweet taste. The idea that we talked about that that the food of the mud was totally absorbed into the body. So unlike physical bread, which comes from the earth, the earth has its parts which can't be absorbed. The manna, because it was from the highest spiritual levels, didn't have any negativity about it. All the negativity had been is refined out because its source is the highest level. So the mon is entirely pure, and because of that, it didn't cause any waste in the human body. There's no sailors, right? You don't have to, in technical terms, it doesn't have any negative things which are rejected. It was completely absorbed into the limbs of the eater, and that reflects its high spiritual origin that is completely and is totally good. We said before that it also, when the mon fell down, other precious objects fell with it. So it wasn't just the manna of the mon didn't just provide nutrition, but it brought with it, as we quoted, precious stones and pearls, and that represents the wealth, the beauty. After all, precious stones and pearls enhance the beauty of the person. So this represents the wealth of the divine that encompasses all human needs, and which are both essential and pleasurable. So the mon, as we're working through these ideas, we see that the mon becomes what I've called a template for of food, or a template of sustenance, or the template even of the higher level of existence. And that we said that it was felt equal, it has a level of equality. It fell in a specific measure, that omer per head. It didn't matter who and what status you were, the rich or the poor, or whether it was your spiritual status. The same size came, ensuring that the great leader Moses and the smallest child received exactly the same portion, emphasizing that at the total root and essence level of the soul, all are equal in front of God. So this idea of the omer per head, the same size, reflects this idea that in the essence of the Jew, we are all rooted in the same level and are all equal in front of God. So the Manna possessed this dual nature. It acts as a bridge between the infinite, or the heavens, and the earth, the infinite and the finite. And mystically, the manna originates from the highest levels of divine pleasure, as we mentioned, specifically from what's called the level of Tala Bedolcha, which literally means the dew of this crystal, and it is called in the Kabbalistic terms the level of Atik, which we said is a level much behind, which is much further or much deeper beyond the standard chain of creation of Seder Ishtalshalis, of the 10 spheres and the 4 worlds, but even beyond that, the level of Ketzer, which is called the crown, which is and the essence of the crown, the level of Atik of the crown. And then the most interesting aspect of it is that it provided physical substance. So it's not something that stayed in the heavens and was only available in a spiritual sense, but it had a physical. It provided that bridge between the physical and the spiritual. So despite its sublime source, the manna underwent a process of enclothing itself, which in Hasidic terminology is called hislapshus. The spirit enclosed itself, and it became something tangible, and became something physical food. But of course, it wasn't so easily recognizable. So when the Jews first saw it, they said, "Manna, what is this?" Because it wasn't understood as a standard physical entity, but it is something that becomes absorbed in the person and gives them spirituality, because it could be ground and milled and cooked in a pot. And this allowed the lechem min hashamayim, the bread of heaven, to become part of the, the blood and flesh of a human person. The idea of damba busori, the blood in a person's flesh of the human body, effectively refining the physical, so he can become that physical entity. He, she, child can become a vessel for the higher spiritual influences, which, not surprisingly, comes from the Torah. And that's part of the lesson we're going to learn in a moment. But most interestingly, we also found that it doesn't fall on Shabbat. It doesn't provide a sustenance, or it wasn't formed. It didn't give us Shabbat. So the mystical reason for the Manna's absence on Shabbos is rooted in the idea that on Shabbos, on the seventh day, the the spirit which empowers the 6 work days rises and elevates itself to absorb from a higher level. So this upward movement on Shabbat to the divine lights and all of creation, their spiritual energies return to the source, to its thought in a state of self-nullification, bittul, what we call bittul, and it rests, and just like a person renews their strength at the time when they rest, so also the Shabbos day becomes renewed, and that's represented by the manna not falling, because the idea is that it's working in a elevated state to absorb strength and spirituality, but it can't come down. It doesn't come down on the Shabbos, so it's the entire Shabbos is entirely directed upwards. There's no descent or downward flow of a new physical matter into the world. And other forms of substance like rain can fall on Shabbos, but that's because they stem from what's called the chetzenius, the external aspect of eternity. But the mon itself was an internal flow, and just as one's internal thoughts and pleasures are elevated on Shabbat, we direct ourselves to higher spiritual activity on Shabbat. We enjoy a meal, but we learn Torah. We feel elevated on Shabbat. We light candles. So there's a spiritual flow up, but towards the higher realm. So also the manna's flow. The manna doesn't flow, but the flow that it does receive is stored within the source, ready to come down in the 6 days and the 6 work days. And that's why we say there's an expression that the day of Shabbos elevates the past week, the 6 days which came beforehand, and acts as a blessing for the next six days, which is going to come afterwards. So while the manna did not fall on Shabbos, it's actually blessed by the Shabbos, and the Zohar, the Zohar, the book of mystical teachings, that all the 6 days are blessed from the seventh. And this is the idea that the double portion, the Lechem Mishnah, right? That's why we have the 2 challahs, and we talk about a double portion in relationship to Shabbos, and that's why we say that on the Friday, a double portion, Lechem Mishnah, Mishnah means 2, right? So Lechem means bread. So the two units of bread that fell on the Friday was the physical manifestation of this Shabbos blessing and providing the peace and pleasure and necessary to experience the day as a day of rest. A person didn't have to think about where their food was coming from, where their parnasa was coming from, because that double portion didn't get consumed after 24 hours, but it stayed as fresh as it could be without any labor, and we're concerned for livelihood. Now, in relationship to Torah, we talk about 2 types of Torah. We talk about Torah as a revealed entity, and Torah as a hidden entity. There's one aspect of the Torah which it's quite easy to understand, meaning to say that it's encompassed by and discussed as rules, and it talks about physical objects that we understand. We talk about um, um, relationships with people, relationships in workplace. We will talk about physical items. And the rules of Judaism discuss that very quite strongly, and they're all codified in the book of in our book of practice and what we do in the Shulchan Aruch. So there are the revealed dimensions of Torah, as I discussed, which we learn, but there are also the there is also the aspect of the Torah which represents the godly spiritual realms, the hidden dimensions of the Torah. And that's explained more fully in the mystical works, and in particular the teachings of Chassidus, which deals entirely with divine and heavenly matters. And therefore, just like bread is absorbed internally, so also our Torah that we learn about physical things is absorbed in our brain. But in a similar sense, when we learn about the spiritual realms, all that is absorbed into ourselves, into our brain as well. And those teachings are called lechem min hashamayim, bread from heaven, just as much as the Torah. The revealed aspects are called lechem min haaretz, bread from the land, and it discusses the land, and it discusses agricultural things, and it discusses financial matters, etc., etc. Right. So also the lechem, the bread, the spiritual teachings represented by Chassidus, lechem, they are lechem min hashamayim. They are the food of heaven. So the revealed Torah is called the Lechem Min Haaretz because it, as we said, it contains questions, disputes, and it's not as clear as could be because it's not totally refined. Refined meaning that it's not totally absorbed, because when it comes down into the physical world, it needs further. It needs to be understood further. In contrast, the inner dimensions of the Torah, the mystical teachings, the bread from heaven, because it contains no questions and disputes, it penetrates directly into the soul and refines the soul, and without any questions or disagreements. So with that, a person might think, well, what's my connection to the bread from heaven? If I wish to learn Torah, it's one thing to understand about agricultural aspects, rain, rivers, trees, agricultural connections like with the land of Israel, and or financial aspects about, or aspects which relate to physical damage. Those are some things that my physicality can relate to. But a person could think that the lechem min hashamayim, the Torah, which describes the mystical or spiritual aspects, that maybe only belongs to those tzaddikim where the mon fell down outside their door, but it doesn't relate to ordinary people where you have to go search for the mon, or you have to go and refine it and even work hard to make it produce it. Remember, we said that the model fell down to everybody equally, teaching us that everybody has equal opportunity and capability to gather and find the lechem min hashamayim, this food from heaven, and to absorb it. Everybody, certainly there are differences between the clever and the not as clever. There's differences between people who are born in this home or that home, but the lesson from the lechem min hashamayim, from this heaven, this food from heaven, was that it fell down in equal amounts to everyone. It's a matter of that a person has to go out and discover it, but it's there and it's available. So that means that every single person has an obligation to study the inner dimensions of the Torah. And with Chassidus, there's no danger of learning anything, because just as the manna contained no waste and it didn't harm anyone, certainly learning the mystical sides and these sides of the spiritual part of Torah cannot hurt a person, and accordingly, we have learned that the mon refined the person and made the person a better person. So therefore, any person who learns the Torah and learns the Chassidus of the Torah will certainly become refined, and certainly the study of Chassidus will influence even the person who might have to go very far to search for that food. But even if a wicked person, it will allow a person who we might call not as good or wicked, it'll cause some sort of effect and help that person to refine themselves, to appreciate the Torah, and to mend their ways and study Torah and do mitzvahs as our sages promise, that the light and the spirit within Chassidus, the expression is the I'll translate, that the spiritual light which is embedded in the teachings of Chassidus brings back a person and shows light so that we'll be able to go on the right path. Many times we go on many different paths, different ways, but if we go on the right path and the path is lit up, we don't have any of these. We have less of a problem. So some argue in a different way. Some argue that no, there are some in the world of Torah that argue that the inner dimensions of Torah should be withheld from a person who's not of the highest spiritual level. That is the reason why the mon didn't fall outside their door, right? So that's why it doesn't reach them. However, by pushing such people away and not allowing them to learn, that actually might ensure a person moves away from the Torah even more. And in time, a person might justify their actions of not learning Torah at all, because there are people might say, "Well, I've been pushed away, and nobody and I wasn't allowed to come close to learn the Hashem's heritage." We find, unfortunately, we find in the land of Israel, in Israel these days, that the secular, although things are changing, but the secular education doesn't allow people to study the Torah. Um, in fact, they don't have much not knowledge of the true and inner parts of the Torah. And they ask and they claim and they said, why is it hidden from me? But this is not the approach of the Hasidim, and certainly not the approach of Hasidus. We need to bring the mon close to the people, and the proper approach is to strengthen our personal study and strengthen the dissemination of Hasidus, which at the end of the day is the bread from heaven, lechem min hashamayim, and in this way, it will transform the the what we call the Yetzer Hara, the influence from the negative inclination, from the evil inclination that exists, and eventually the lechem min hashamayim, the mon, will have the influence that even the further away nations could taste it, and certainly every single Jew who is not yet had been able to teach or to learn the Torah, their learning of these parts of the Torah will change a person from becoming an enemy to a friend, and that will make a person have peace within the Jewish nation. And through the study of Chassidus in general and the Torah, we will then merit the true revelation of the inner spirit, and we'll be able to deserve and have the imminent arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu and have the true and complete redemption. So I wish everybody a good day, and to absorb the lessons of the mon, the food from heaven. Bye for now.